The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was absolute, unbroken by the hum of civilization or even the distant whir of a plane above. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a kind of silence that pressed against you, like the weight of something ancient and forgotten. It felt as though the whole world had been swallowed by the snow, every trace of life erased, leaving behind a frozen wasteland that stretched endlessly in every direction. It was supposed to be the perfect adventure. Amanda and I, isolated, just the two of us, alone in the north of Alaska, surrounded by history and mystery. A long-forgotten Cold War base, buried beneath layers of ice, waiting for me to restore a mechanism that could open time capsules. It was supposed to be romantic, the kind of isolation that forces you to reconnect. No distractions. Just us. But something went wrong. I couldn't have known then what that wrong would come to mean, but as we arrived at the base, something gnawed at me. Maybe it was just the weight of the place itself. The cold was different here, heavier, as if the air had been waiting too long to be disturbed. Or maybe it was the feeling that history had been waiting for us. I didn't think much of it at the time. It seemed like the perfect way to reconnect. Amanda and I were only a few years into our marriage, but I felt like we needed this, something bold, something that would bring us closer. The base was abandoned, frozen in time since the 1960s, with no one ever daring to visit. Just the idea of it had always intrigued me, the thought of uncovering whatever had been left behind, and restoring it to its original purpose. So we packed our bags and headed north, driven by a sense of adventure and the strange allure of the unknown. I remember Amanda being so excited. She had always been the adventurous type, and the idea of spending weeks in a place as isolated as this was thrilling to her. We spent our days exploring the icy wastelands, our nights curled up with hot cocoa in front of the fire, the shadows of the abandoned room shifting like old ghosts. It was all so romantic, until it wasn't. The mechanism was located deep within the base, in what had once been an operations room. It was all rusted and forgotten, surrounded by old documents and strange objects, artifacts of the past that seemed to belong to another world. But among all the dust and decay, I found it, the device that would unlock the time capsules. It was complex, a series of intricate gears and levers that hadn't turned in decades. It took days of trial and error, but I finally managed to get it working. That's when I found the first film reel. It was tucked away in a dusty corner of one of the capsules. The label read 1963. I didn't think much of it at first. The Cold War had been full of strange experiments, strange obsessions with time and secrecy. The capsule wasn't anything particularly special, just a relic. But as I began to spool the film, I noticed something that stopped me dead in my tracks. The black and white footage was shaky, old, and grainy, but the image was unmistakable. A young man with a scar, kissing a woman who looked eerily like Amanda. I thought it was a coincidence. My mind dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the oddities of old footage. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something about it didn't sit right. It couldn't have been her, could it? The film was from 1963. But as I stared at it, something in the pit of my stomach told me there was more to it than just an old film. I turned to Amanda, who had been standing behind me, watching me with that quiet, contemplative look she often wore when something caught her attention. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me for a long moment. Then, with a soft smile, she turned and walked away, as if nothing was wrong. I tried to brush it off, but my subconscious kept circling back to that image. It was an uncomfortable feeling, a creeping sense of unease that I couldn't shake. And as the days wore on, it seemed to grow stronger. Little did I know, that was just the beginning. The days that followed should have been filled with wonder, discovery, and excitement. After all, I was here with Amanda, surrounded by the remnants of history, in a place few people would ever visit. But every moment felt off-kilter, like a song playing just out of tune. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had opened a door I wasn't meant to. The image of Amanda in that old film haunted me, but I tried to push it aside. I didn't want to let my mind spiral into absurd ideas, not when we were here, in this remote place, on an adventure that should have been ours to enjoy. I kept reminding myself that it was just a film, an old piece of forgotten history. There was no reason to believe anything other than that. But then Trey showed up. I hadn't expected anyone else to be out here, especially not someone Amanda knew. Trey had been an old friend of hers, one of those people who had drifted in and out of her life like a shadow, always just out of reach but never truly gone. I didn't think much of it at first. He introduced himself as an astrophysicist, here on a mission of his own. He was studying the magnetic fields around the base, something to do with the region's unexplained anomalies. It sounded plausible, even if it seemed strange to have him out here just as we were trying to restore the time capsule mechanism. But what struck me more than his reason for being here was the way Amanda reacted to him. She lit up when she saw him, a soft smile curving across her face, her eyes twinkling in a way I hadn't seen in months. It was subtle, but I noticed. At first, I brushed it off as nothing. Maybe they just shared some old connection from the past, something I didn't understand. But as the days went by, their interactions became more frequent, more charged. Trey would join us for dinner, and they'd talk for hours, their conversation flowing easily as though they hadn't missed a beat in all these years. I found myself on the outside, the third wheel in my own relationship. It wasn't so much what they said, it was how they looked at each other. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and it unsettled me. It wasn't just the way Trey looked at Amanda, it was the way Amanda looked at him. She was more animated around him, more herself. She had always been energetic, but there was something different now. She began talking about things I didn't expect to hear from her, about living for yourself, about how time was precious, and how everything was temporary. It was as if she was telling me these things, but the words felt more like they were meant for Trey. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the task at hand, but I couldn't escape the growing sense of alienation. Every time Amanda and Trey exchanged a look or shared a laugh, I felt like I was slipping further away from her. I knew she wasn't entirely mine to keep. She had always been independent, fiercely so, but this felt different. She was changing in front of me, and I wasn't sure I recognized her anymore. The worst part was that I couldn't bring myself to confront her. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Amanda, I noticed you're getting awfully cozy with your old friend, and it's making me uncomfortable. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. But the unease lingered, festering just below the surface, until I could hardly bear to be around them. One evening, after dinner, I decided to take my mind off things by heading back to the operations room. I needed to check on the mechanism again, maybe get some work done to distract myself from the tension that was hanging between us all. As I stood there, sifting through more of the old documents, I found another film reel. This one was different. It was labeled 1982, and the film itself was in color. I hesitated for only a moment before deciding to play it. The footage started with the grainy quality of old film, but the colors were more vivid, the images sharper. My heart sank as I recognized the man in the film, the same scarred face from the previous footage, only now he looked older, more refined. And, once again, he was kissing a woman who looked exactly like Amanda. But this time, she hadn't aged a day. The year was 1982, and she still looked like the woman I had married. My stomach twisted in knots, and a cold sweat broke out on my brow. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. The man in the film was no longer the same young man from the 1960s. This time, it was Trey. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The impossible had just become undeniable. Amanda hadn't aged. Trey hadn't aged. How was that even possible? The film showed them in the same scene, the same place. But the implications, my mind raced, trying to piece together what I was seeing. The connection was too strange, too eerie to dismiss as coincidence anymore. I stumbled back from the projector, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to. I looked at the image of Amanda, so perfectly frozen in time, and it hit me with a chilling clarity. My wife wasn't who she said she was. And I had been living a lie. I couldn't look at Amanda the same way after that. Every time I saw her, I felt the weight of those two films pressing against my mind, their images haunting my every thought. I tried to tell myself that I was imagining things, that I had misunderstood something. Maybe the films were just old, recycled footage from a time when everything seemed shrouded in secrecy. But deep down, I knew better. The truth had already begun to unravel, piece by piece. Amanda wasn't just a woman who looked like the person I had married. She wasn't the person I thought she was at all. The way she had acted around Trey, the way they had shared those intimate moments, only made the realization sharper. I wanted to confront her, to ask her what the hell was going on, but the words stuck in my throat every time I tried. There was no way I could just ask her outright. How could I explain what I had seen? The footage, the same man in both time periods, the impossible fact that she hadn't aged a day while everyone else around her did? It was a question that stretched far beyond anything I could comprehend. Instead, I tried to bury the truth inside me, to convince myself that it wasn't important. After all, Amanda was here now, with me, wasn't she? But as the days dragged on, my unease only grew. Then, one morning, Trey approached me while I was working on the mechanism in the operations room. He was casual, but there was an underlying intensity to his presence that made my skin crawl. I could sense that something was off about him too, that he wasn't the man I had assumed he was when we first met. He stood a little too close, and there was something almost predatory in his gaze as he asked if I needed help with the repairs. I declined, my voice flat as I tried to keep my distance. But it wasn't just the mechanics that were broken here, it was everything around us, the fragile illusion of normalcy that had been shattered by what I had seen in those films. Trey seemed to sense the tension. He didn't push the subject of the repairs any further. Instead, he shifted the conversation to the magnetic fields, something about the anomalies in the area. But all I could think about was Amanda. I wanted to ask him about her, to demand to know what was going on, but I didn't. Instead, we exchanged pleasantries, and he left me alone in the room, leaving behind the faint smell of his cologne. It was then that I decided to confront Amanda. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know. She was in the living quarters, sitting by the fire when I found her, reading a book. The warmth of the flames seemed to contrast the chill in my chest as I walked over to her. She looked up and smiled, but there was a subtle shift in her expression when she saw my face. I must have looked different, disoriented, maybe even a little lost. I couldn't hide it anymore. My voice was steady, but the words felt foreign as I spoke. Amanda, I need to know the truth. About everything. About the films, about you, about Trey. Her face changed, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. It was almost as if she had braced herself for this moment, like she had been waiting for me to finally ask the questions that had been building between us for days. She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she set the book down, stood up, and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. It was as though she was choosing her words carefully, as if she was calculating how much of the truth she was willing to reveal. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes soft and distant. I never wanted you to find out this way, she said quietly. But you have to understand, Brian, that none of this was ever meant to be real for you. You weren't supposed to remember. You were just a cover, a part of the mission. I stared at her, my chest tightening as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. A cover? What are you talking about? What mission? My voice cracked slightly, a mix of disbelief and frustration taking over. Amanda took a deep breath, her expression unreadable now. I'm not who you think I am. I'm part of a program, a secret project called Kronos Woman. I've been sent here as an observer, to make sure that certain events unfold the way they're supposed to. My mission at this base is to prevent a time collapse caused by a missing capsule. The time capsules, Brian, they're not just relics. They contain the keys to stopping a future disaster, one that could destroy everything. I was shaking my head, unable to fully process what she was saying. You're telling me you're, what? Some kind of time traveler? And Trey? Her eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her voice lowering. Yes, Trey and I, we're agents, just like me. We're here to make sure everything stays on course. But Brian, the truth is that I wasn't supposed to get close to you. You were just a temporary part of the mission, a cover so I could keep my identity hidden. But I couldn't help it. I fell in love with you. I stood there, stunned, the world spinning around me. I had been a pawn in her game, a piece in a larger plan I couldn't even begin to understand. I felt hollow, betrayed, and yet, I didn't know what to feel anymore. Everything I had believed in, everything I had thought was real, had been a lie. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding in my chest as Amanda's words echoed in my mind, each one tearing apart the fragile reality I had been clinging to. My stomach churned with a deep sense of betrayal, but it wasn't just the fact that she had lied to me, no, it was something deeper, something more horrifying. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that my wife, the woman I had loved and shared my life with, wasn't even real. She wasn't the person I thought she was. She wasn't the person I had married. The entire foundation of my existence was suddenly called into question. I had been living a life that wasn't mine, surrounded by people who weren't who they said they were. The world felt like it was collapsing around me, and I couldn't stop it. Amanda watched me closely, her eyes filled with something that I couldn't quite read, pity, maybe, or guilt, or perhaps both. I wanted to scream at her, to demand she take back the lies, but I couldn't form the words. I had always thought I knew her, thought I understood her better than anyone. How could I have been so blind? And then, there was Trey, the man who had suddenly appeared at the base, this familiar stranger who seemed to hold such a strange power over Amanda. My mind was racing as I thought back to all the moments I had witnessed between them, the soft glances, the quiet conversations, the way they moved around each other with a certain ease, like two pieces of a puzzle that fit together perfectly. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized the truth. Trey wasn't just an old friend. He was another part of the program, another agent in the twisted game that had been played with my life. He had been sent here, just like Amanda, to complete the mission. And they were together, trapped in this web of time, bound by duty, and yet there was something else between them. A connection. A history. A bond that went far beyond what I could ever have imagined. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of everything Amanda had just revealed. I turned away from her, my hands trembling as I reached for the door. I needed to get out. I needed to think. I needed space to breathe. As I stepped outside into the cold, the frigid air slapped me in the face, but it didn't offer any relief. The snow, the silence, nothing could clear my mind. I walked aimlessly across the frozen expanse, each step sinking into the deep snow, as if the earth itself was trying to pull me under. The base loomed behind me, silent and lifeless, just like everything else around me. I felt like I was walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The landscape was beautiful, in its way, but it was cold and unforgiving, just like the truth Amanda had revealed. There was no escape from it. I don't know how long I wandered, lost in my own thoughts, before I saw him. Trey. He was standing at the edge of the compound, looking out at the endless white horizon. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about walking in the opposite direction, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Something pulled me toward him. I didn't want to face him. I couldn't. Yet I found myself moving forward, my legs carrying me against my will. He turned as I approached, his expression unreadable. There was no surprise in his eyes, no remorse. He had been waiting for this moment. I know what you're thinking, Trey said, his voice calm, almost detached. But this wasn't meant to be easy. Easy? I spat, my voice rising, the anger welling up inside me. You've been playing me this entire time, haven't you? You and Amanda, this whole thing, it's all a lie. Trey didn't flinch. He didn't seem at all disturbed by my outburst. Instead, he gave a small, almost sad smile. It's not that simple, Brian. We were both part of something much bigger. You're right that we've been playing a role, but the mission is everything. It's always been about the mission. And, yes, we were both supposed to keep you in the dark. You were just a cover, just someone to keep the timeline intact. But Amanda, she wasn't supposed to fall in love with you. That wasn't part of the plan. I took a step back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And now? What happens now? My voice was trembling, a mixture of confusion and rage flooding through me. You and Amanda are going to leave me here, aren't you? You're going to disappear, just like everyone else has. And I'll be left with nothing. Trey looked at me, his expression softening for the first time. No, it's not like that. We're not just going to leave you. But Amanda and I, we have a choice now. We can go, we can escape to another time, to a place where none of this will matter. A place where we can be together. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew in that moment that I had lost Amanda not just to him, but to something far bigger than either of us. They were already making plans to leave, to escape to a future that didn't include me. The mission, the time collapse, it all seemed so far removed from the life I had thought I was living. I had been a pawn in a game that was far older and more complicated than anything I could have imagined. The realization was unbearable. The truth was clear now. I was nothing more than a temporary blip in their lives. They had their own mission, their own purpose, and I had been nothing more than a fleeting distraction. But I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. I couldn't. I stormed back to the operations room, my mind racing. I had to stop them. I had to stop them from leaving, from escaping the timeline, from disappearing into the future. I didn't know how, but I couldn't just let them walk away. I couldn't be the man who stood by and let everything slip through my fingers. There had to be something I could do. I knew what I had to do. The mechanism in the operations room was my last hope, the only thing that could potentially stop them. It was old, archaic even, but it had been built to control the very thing Amanda and Trey had been after, the time portal. The device that could open the capsules wasn't just for retrieving relics of the past. It was a key that could control the flow of time itself, allowing them to slip through into another era, another existence, far from this one. I had no idea how it worked, or if I could even activate it again, but desperation clawed at me, making the decision clearer than any logic ever could. I returned to the operations room, the cold metal walls pressing in on me as I hurried to the ancient device. It had taken me days to understand its intricate mechanisms, but now, with everything on the line, I couldn't afford to hesitate. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the rusted gears, trying to remember how I had last activated the machine. Every click, every turn of the lever, Felt like I was playing with something far beyond my understanding, something ancient and dangerous. The machine whirred to life, creaking as if it hadn't been used in decades. I could hear the faint hum of energy beginning to pulse through the system, the gears moving in unison, the power building. The light in the room flickered, the shadows stretching as the portal began to open. Just as I was about to make the final adjustment, I heard a soft sound behind me, a whisper, a footstep. I turned quickly, and there she was. Amanda. Her eyes locked onto mine, a sadness there that I hadn't seen before. She had followed me, of course. She knew what I was doing. And as I stood there, poised to seal the future away from them, she spoke, her voice soft but filled with a weight that seemed to echo in the silent room. Brian, she said, her voice cracking with the pain of the words she was about to speak. Please don't do this. You don't understand. You're not just stopping us. You're stopping yourself, too. I wanted to shout, to demand to know what she meant, but I didn't have the words. I could only stare at her, my heart breaking as I realized how deep the betrayal ran. Amanda wasn't just leaving me. She was leaving everything behind, her life here, everything we had together, and now she was asking me to let her go, to understand. But how could I? How could I understand the impossible? The woman I thought I knew, the one I had married, was something more than I could ever comprehend. And Trey, standing just behind her, his eyes cold and calculating, was the final confirmation that everything I had believed in was a lie. Before I could say anything, Amanda stepped closer to me, her gaze softening, a sadness mixed with something else, a love that felt so pure and impossible that it hurt. She reached out, her fingers brushing against my cheek. Brian, you were the only real thing in all my life, she whispered. The only thing that ever felt like home. Her words tore through me, but I didn't have time to respond before the light in the room shifted, brightening as the portal grew wider, the crackling energy growing louder. I had no more time. This was it. I had to make my choice. The machine was ready to close, ready to seal off the door to the future. With one final, desperate act, I slammed my hand down on the lever. The whirring of the mechanism reached a deafening crescendo, and the lights flashed blindingly. I could feel the pull of the portal, the weight of everything, time itself, collapsing around me. Amanda's face twisted in pain as she stepped back, but just as the light from the portal began to envelop her, she turned to me one last time. She kissed me, a kiss that was full of everything we had shared, all the love and the memories, and the terrible knowledge that it wasn't real. Goodbye, Brian, she said, her voice barely a whisper as the light engulfed her, and she disappeared into the time portal, vanishing into the future, leaving me standing there, my hands still on the lever, breathless and broken. The room was silent. The portal was gone. Everything was gone. I was alone again, standing in the remnants of a life that never truly existed. The machine, once humming with energy, was now still, its purpose fulfilled. But there was no joy in the victory, no satisfaction in having stopped them. There was only a deep, aching void where Amanda used to be. I had stopped them from escaping, from leaving me, but at what cost? My world had been shattered, and I was left with nothing but the painful memory of her last words. A year passed. I returned to the base, the desolate, frozen compound that had once held so much promise. The rooms were empty, the capsules long gone. There was no trace of Amanda or Trey. The time portal was sealed, the mechanism deactivated, its power gone. But every night, when I close my eyes, I see her, Amanda, always just out of reach, her face blurred by the passage of time. And every night, she whispers to me, softly, as if from far away. A date. A time. A promise that hasn't yet come to pass. I don't know what it means, but I hear it every night. A date that haunts me. A date that I know will change everything again. And I wonder, deep down, if I'll ever truly escape the truth, if I'll ever be able to forget the woman I thought I loved, and the impossible life we could never have.